Hi, this is Barbara. I work at the Gettysburg Library, and today I'm going to be reading The Hermit, or The Gift of Corn, from Myths and Legends of the Sioux by Marie McLaughlin. In a deep forest, far from the villages of his people, lived a hermit. His tent was made of buffalo skins, and his dress was made of deerskin. Far from the haunts of any human being, this old hermit was content to spend his days. All day long he would wander through the forest, studying the different plants of nature and collecting precious roots, which he used as medicine. At long intervals, some warrior would arrive at the tent of the old hermit and get medicine roots from him for the tribe, the old hermit's medicine being considered far superior to all others. After one long day's ramble in the woods, the hermit came home late, and being very tired, at once lay down on his bed and was just dozing off to sleep when he felt something rub against his foot. Awakening with a start, he noticed a dark object, and an arm was extended to him, holding in its hand a flint-pointed arrow. The hermit thought, "This must be a spirit, as there is no human being around here but myself." A voice then said, "Hermit, I have come to invite you to my home." "How? Yes, I will come," said the old hermit. Wherewith he rose, wrapped his robe about him, and followed. Outside the door he stopped and looked around, but could see no sign of the dark object. "Whoever you are, or whatever you be, wait for me, as I don't know where to go find your house," said the hermit. Not an answer did he receive, nor could he hear any noises, as though anyone was walking through the brush. Re-entering his tent, he retired and was soon fast asleep. The next night, the same thing occurred again, and the hermit followed the object out, only to be left as before. He was very angry to think that anyone should be trying to make sport of him, and he determined to find out who this could be who was disturbing his night's rest. The next evening he cut a hole in the tent large enough to stick an arrow through, and stood by the door watching. Soon the dark object came and stopped outside the door, and said, "Grandfather, I came to—" But he never finished the sentence, for the old man let go his arrow, and he heard the arrow strike something which produced a sound as though he had shot into a sack of pebbles. He did not go out that night to see what his arrow had struck, but early next morning he went out and looked at the spot about where he thought the object had stood. There on the ground lay a little heap of corn, and from this little heap a small line of corn lay scattered along a path. This he followed far into the woods. When he came to a very small knoll, the trail ended. At the end of the trail was a large circle from which the grass had been scraped off clean. "The corn trail stops at the edge of this circle," said the old man, "so this must be the home of whoever it was that invited me." He took his bone knife and hatchet and proceeded to dig down into the center of the circle. When he had got down to the length of his arm, he came to a sack of dried meat. Next he found a sack of Indian turnips. Then a sack of dried cherries. Then a sack of corn, and last of all, another sack, empty except that there was about a cupful of corn in one corner of it, and that the sack had a hole in the other corner where his arrow had pierced it. From this hole in the sack, the corn was scattered along the trail, which guided the old man to the cache, the hiding place. From this, the hermit taught the tribes how to keep their provisions when traveling and were overloaded. He explained to them how they should dig a pit and put their provisions into it and cover them with earth. By this method, the Indians used to keep provisions all summer, and when fall came, they would return to their cache, and on opening it would find everything as fresh as the day they were placed there. The old hermit was also thanked as the discoverer of corn, which had never been known to the Indians until discovered by the old hermit. The Mysterious Butte. From Myths and Legends of the Sioux by Marie McDonald. Marie McLaughlin, I apologize. A young man was once hunting and came to a steep hill. The east side of the hill suddenly dropped off to a very steep bank. He stood on this bank, and at the base he noticed a small opening. On going down to examine it more closely, he found it was large enough to admit a horse or buffalo. On either side of the door were figures of different animals engraved into the wall. He entered the opening, and there, scattered about on the floor, lay many bracelets, pipes, and many other things of ornament, as though they had been offerings to some great spirit. He passed through this first room, and on entering the second, it was so dark that he could not see his hands before his face. So, becoming scared, he hurriedly left the place, and returning home, told what he had seen. Upon hearing this, the chief selected 4 of his most daring warriors to go with this young man and investigate and ascertain whether the young man was telling the truth or not. The 5 proceeded to the butte, and at the entrance the young man refused to go inside, as the figures on either side of the entrance had been changed. The 4 entered, and seeing that all in the first chamber was as the young man had told, they went on to the next chamber, and found it so dark that they could not see anything. They continued on, however, feeling their way along the walls. They finally found an entrance that was so narrow they had to squeeze into it sideways. They felt their way around the walls and found another entrance, so low down that they had to crawl on their hands and knees to go through it into the next chamber. On entering the last chamber, they found a very sweet odor coming from the opposite direction. Feeling around and crawling on their hands and knees, they discovered a hole in the floor leading downward. From this hole came up the sweet odor. They hurriedly held a council and decided to go no further, but return to the camp and report what they had found. On getting to the first chamber, one of the young men said, "I'm going to take these bracelets to show that we are telling the truth." "No," said the other 3, "this being the abode of some great spirit, you may have some accident befall you for taking what is not yours." "Ah, you fellows are like old women," he said, taking a fine bracelet and encircling his left wrist with it. When they reached the village, they reported what they had seen. The young man exhibited the bracelet to prove that it was the truth they had told. Shortly after this, these 4 young men were out fixing up traps for wolves. They would raise one end of a long, heavy log and place a stick under it, bracing up the log. A large piece of meat was placed about 5 feet away from the log, and this space covered with poles and willows. At the place where the upright stick was put, a hole was left open, large enough to admit the body of a wolf. The wolf, scenting the meat and unable to get at it through the poles and the willows, would crowd into the hole and work his body forward in order to get to the meat. He would push down the brace, and the log, thus released, would hold the wolf fast under its weight. The young man with the bracelet was placing his bait under the log when he released the log by knocking down the brace, and the log caught his wrist, on which he wore the bracelet. He could not release himself and called loud and long for assistance. His friends, hearing his call, came to his assistance, and on lifting the log found the young man's wrist was broken. "Now," said they, "you have been punished for taking the wrist out of the chamber of the mysterious butte." Some time after this, a young man went to the butte and saw engraved on the wall a woman holding in her hand a pole, with which she was holding up a large amount of beef, which had been laid across another pole, that which had broken into 2 from the weight of so much meat. He returned to the camp and reported what he had seen. All around the figure he saw marks of buffalo hoofs, also marked upon the wall. The next day, an enormous herd of buffalo came near to the village, and a great many were killed. The women were busy cutting up and drying the meat. At one camp was more meat than at any other. The woman was hanging meat upon a large tent pole when the pole broke into two, and she was obliged to hold the meat up with another pole, just as the young man had seen on the mysterious butte. Ever after that, the Indians paid weekly visits to this butte, and thereon would read the signs that were to govern their plans. This butte was always considered the prophet of the tribe.